For the CAD202 final project, the mini vise, the deliverables listed are the assembly model, the assembly drawing, detail views for each non-standard piece, and exploded view drawing with the parts called out and the list of material. And I just want to real briefly cover those items. As you can see, I've already got all of the parts that I need actually modeled for this particular piece. But what I want to do now is I want to begin to assemble these into the model. So first I'm going to rotate the pieces that need to be rotated. I know that this is going to be going on the back side, so I want that to be rotated in that orientation. I know that this object here needs to be rotated into this orientation. In fact, I can go ahead and move this from this endpoint to this endpoint, and move this from this endpoint to this endpoint while I have them rotated. So you can see now that I've got those couple of pieces lined up. I need to rotate this 180 degrees, so I'm just going to rotate that 180, and then I'm going to move it from its geographic center point just to the center point of this circle right here. What that's going to do is it's going to locate it for me so that I don't have to worry about trying to put it anywhere else. Next I'm going to rotate this piece, and that's only going to be rotated 90 degrees, and I'm going to move this from the center point right here to the center point right here, and that's going to locate that, and if I orbit this just slightly I can see that that's in the correct place. So now I've got a couple of things to do where I've got some multiples of some different pieces. So what I want to do first is I'm going to rotate this piece here the 90 degrees so that it fits in with what I need it to fit in, but then I'm going to go ahead and mirror it so that I have two facing the opposite direction. Now I can move this one here from this end point up to this end point, and if you see I missed that end point, so I want to make sure that I move it appropriately from there to there. And it looks like I may actually be off on this one too. Let me just zoom in and verify that that's in the correct location. One thing you don't want to do ever is start unioning any of these pieces together, because they are separate pieces. So now I've got all of those pieces in. I'm going to need to rotate this thing first 90 degrees, and then I'm going to go to a UCS front, and while I'm in here I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Let me undo that so that I can know where it's going. So rotate that 90 degrees. I'm going to rotate this up 90 degrees. Okay, now that stuff there is in the proper orientation. I'm going to move this from its geographic center point to the center over here, and it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get a center over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it from its center point to the center point here. And then looking at the dimensions, I can see that it's 12.5 in. So now I'm going to move it an additional 12.5 to locate that in the correct place. Next thing I want to do is go to a UCS right and rotate this piece here so that it is straight up. And now I'm going to move it from the internal center point to the top center point over here, and then I'm going to copy it so that I have another one that I can work with, and we're going to rotate this one here 180 degrees and then move it from its internal center point to the bottommost center point on here. So as you can see, I've got a lot of the stuff assembled already just by doing some simple rotation. Now I want to move this piece from its center point over here, and I'm going to have to orbit around, and I want to get the center point of this to locate that in its correct location. Now the only thing that I have left are the screws, so I'm going to go back to a world UCS because these things are going to be rotated along that direction. So I'm going to start by first rotating this one. And once I get it rotated, I'm going to move it onto my screen a little bit. And here I'm going to use a little bit of a shortcut. If I look at the dimensions, I can see that these things are 19.5 apart. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to copy it over 19.5. And then I'm going to copy the other one over 19.5. So what I have is I have these 3 screws that should be 19.5 apart, 19.5 millimeters apart. So now I'm going to move them from the outermost center point here to the center point of the countersink. But when I do it, instead of just grabbing one like I did there, I'm going to grab all 3 and just move them as a unit so that they go into place. Now there's a couple of different ways that I can do this next step, and the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to mirror this, this, and this around the midpoint of the whole thing. What that should do is it should give me the 3 screws on the opposite side as well. So now I've got this screw, which is the only thing that I have left to place, so I'm going to rotate this. It's 90 degrees, and then looking at the drawing, these things are 35 apart, so I'm going to copy this over 35. And then I'm going to move these 2 from the center point of the outside to the center point of the countersink. Then I'm going to copy them over to here. Now everything that I do from this moment, I'm going to want to do both of them at the same time. So the rotating of 180 degrees, as soon as I figure out where they went, I can go ahead now and move those again from the outside center point here to the center point here. So what I have now is I've got everything in all the views that I need to have, and everything looks to be the way that it is supposed to be. I do want to turn off perspective just because that can get a little bit confusing. And here you can see I've got the assembly model. Now, in addition to the assembly model, I've got to create a drawing of this assembly. So if I just go to base view from model space and I select everything and hit enter, it's going to ask me, do I want to use an existing layout? And I'm actually going to call this ASSY DWG. That way I know that the tab that I'm getting ready to create is my assembly drawing tab. And then once I get it over to here, I can place my front view, my top view, my right side view, and my isometric view, and hit enter. Now at this point I can go in and I can place the dimensions that are pertinent, like the overall length of this. The overall length from here to here is irrelevant because it does change, so you could put in there what the maximum is and stuff like that, but this satisfies the assembly model with some basic dimensioning, and turn this to shaded with visible lines. That way it looks a little bit better. With some basic dimensioning, we can get this into being an actual assembly drawing. So we've got the assembly model. For the assembly drawing, again, you may want to just add a couple of dimensions. This thing right here, that's 130. Its overall height is 45. You may want to put in the distance between here and here, which is another 145. And then you can add other dimensions in here so that we can estimate how long this thing would actually be if it was fully extended or if it was brought in fully. So if I were to give this an overall dimension now, from here to here, I would see that it's 202. But I also know that I can shrink that in by another 37, and that it can be expanded out by another 33. So it could be the 202 plus the 33 or minus the 37. So in doing that, it gives me a good indication of how big this thing actually is. So now, going back to detail views for each non-standard piece, if I go back to the model, I can go right back to base view from model space, and rather than selecting everything, let's say that all I want to do is this piece right here, which is going to be my end plate. I can say enter, and my layout name, I'm going to make end plate. Hit enter, and now I can locate those three. Now, keeping in mind this is in the assembly view, so everything is not going to look exactly the way you want it. In fact, this is showing me the front view as being the right side view because of the way it's oriented in the model. I'm okay with that. All I have to do is locate this, and hit enter, and there I've got those two views. Now, under base, I can come in here and create another view if I want to create another view. In this particular instance, these are really the only two views that I need, so I'm just going to go with these two views. If I hit the drop down, I can change the scale. I may want to make this a little bit bigger, but I'll go ahead and leave it with from parent. But I do want to click on this and do a projected view of this one to show the isometric, just for the purpose of consistency. If I want, I can move these views so that I have a little bit more room on the screen. And at this point, I can add other pieces to this. So I know that I'm on the end plate, but I can come in here to base and say from model space, and let me just go back to model because it's easier, and do base view. From model space, I may want to do the movable jaw as well. So at this point I can hit enter, and if I hit down, it shows me the layout name that I can use, and in this case I want to use end plate. And again, this is going to be in the right side view, so I want to click here, exit, and then I want to bring this over. Now this is probably a little bit bigger than I would want for this, so I'm going to change the scale of this. Instead of being 2:1, I'm going to go to 1:1. That way I've got everything that I need. I can now relocate this so that I still have plenty of room on my sheet. And now I want to come to this view and do a projected view from it to show the top view, and just for the purpose of consistency, again with the isometric. I can now go in and I can begin detailing out all of these views. The dimensions that you're going to want to place are pretty much linked to the dimensions in the book. So it's a lot easier to get the information that you need if you match up the dimensions that are in the book with the dimensions that we have on the objects. Then you can pretty quickly go through and get all the dimensions that you need. So that is going to be the detail views of the non-standard pieces. The non-standard pieces in this particular exercise is everything but the nuts and bolts. So the bolt that goes through here, the 6 of these and the 4 of these, those are the only standard parts. So those ones are going to have to be, those ones are not going to have to be modeled like the rest of them. The last thing that we have is the exploded view, and this is going to be probably the trickier of the things that you're going to do. The easiest way to start that is to first copy everything that you have over to the side. By copying this over to the side, you ensure that you're not damaging your assembly view at all. Now at this point, I'm just going to move things based on the axis they were assembled under. So we'll move this up, and that shows the explosion of those pieces. Now I can take and move this retainer up, and then now I can move all of this straight back so that it's out of my part. I can then take and move these three objects straight out. And for consistency purposes, I can move this up, or for clarity purposes, I can move it down. I could also move it back, but if you move this one back, keep in mind that this thing is going to spread out really far, really fast. So I now need to select this and all of this, in addition to those three screws that are holding this thing in place. So I'm going to try to grab those right here. And then I want to move all of that away from my object, making sure that I'm going along the path that I need to. I can then move this, this, and this straight out the back. Moving this and this straight off the front of this piece now. And then moving this off the front as well. Now, things may need to be adjusted as you go for greater movement and stuff, but you're starting to see the picture. Once you get this thing completely spread out and the way that you want it, you have a pretty good working exploded view, and the downside to that is it's going to be spread out pretty far. At this point I can move this out, move these two pieces, and I'm going to move those, and they're nearly going to touch that. We'll move this back a little bit. This is really all done by just making it look good. You want a nice clear representation of how these pieces separate and where these pieces go. And once you have something like this, and again you're going to need to play around with this a little bit, but once you have this completed, then you can go to base view from model space, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select everything in the exploded view, and the layout name that I want to use is going to be exploded. So now in here I want to do a southeast ISO, because I think that may give me the best look for this. Actually, the northeast isometric in this case is going to give me the best look, and the scale that it's currently using is a 1:5, and I think I can go a little bit bigger, maybe 1:2. 1:2 shows me everything on the screen, so I don't want any hidden lines. I just want shaded with visible lines. I don't want anything clouding up this. Edge visibility, I don't even need to have tangent edges on or anything else like that. I just want to make sure that everything is very, very clear and easy to see. And I'm going to place this up here in the corner, and then exit, and there's my view. So now I've got my exploded view. I can then go to the Annotate tab and insert a table and go ahead and fill out the list of material. You're going to use the same part numbers that are in the book. So 1 is going to be your base, 2 is your drive screw, 3 is your end plate, 4 is your slider, 5 is your holder plate, and so forth and so on. And then you're going to label those pieces on here in the list of material. So your list of material is only going to be 3 columns, but it's going to be 11 items. So you've got a 3x11, and once you add the header row, that makes it a 3x12. The only things that you need is item number, name, and quantity, and from there you'll be able to type out your list of material with everything else. You can add a 4th column if you want for the material, since it's given to you in everything. But that shows, this tutorial covers now how to do the assembly, how to do the drawing, the detail views for all non-standard pieces, and then the exploded view. But again, make sure that you separate your exploded view from your assembly view, because if I start moving stuff around on here, it's going to change my assembly drawing, and I don't want to change my assembly drawing at all. I do want to turn off hidden lines in this, because the hidden lines definitely make this thing a lot harder to see and harder to understand. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. At the end of the day, what I'm looking for is layouts that have each of the deliverables on them.